In the previous video, we got the HTML written and for the footer, and we started styling it. There were a few things we did. We did display flex on footer columns and margin left auto to um, to push the second two columns to the right. So let's go ahead and do that. Display flex, margin left auto. And I want to also note that I made a mistake. This class needs to match what's in the CSS. All right. Now let's go back to the, the browser and see what do we need. Well, most of what we need is just various pieces of spacing, margins, paddings, etc. So let's go to the brief. We'll need exact values for this. I think we've pretty much got everything from here. So what do we need? Oops, 60 on top and bottom, 80 on left and right. As we've done before, we can use padding in this case, all the way around the container. Although I will note that once you start doing responsive design, you typically won't use the padding around the sides, but it's fine for now. We've got these values for the logo, the same as they were in the header. There's supposed to be 80 pixels between these two columns and 108 pixels between the footer and the logo. So let's go ahead and get all this in place. You know, I think we can just do it directly in the HTML file. Not HTML, sorry, CSS. So the logo, the width is smaller than the height, so 57 is the width. And that's how I always do it because I always forget which comes first. Usually it's the width that comes first, but I constantly forget, so I just base it on what it looks like. As I said, we'll just use padding, and the element to put that on is the footer. And I haven't said it in this video yet, but if you haven't tried this yourself, I certainly recommend that you do so. Padding. What would this be? Well, you could have come up with a couple answers. What it represents is space between the footer columns element and the footer copyright element. It might look like it's saying it's space between the logo and the footer copyright, but really, since it's the footer columns element that we need to consider here, because they're the sibling elements. Where close that. Because we have footer columns and footer copyright. These are sibling elements. We could do a margin bottom on this or a margin top on that. Either of them would actually be fine. If you did padding, it would work, but it fits more with the box model to use a margin because these are sibling elements and the distance between sibling elements is margin. That's what it is. So I will do margin top on this element. But we don't want to just do the margin top. And here, let me show you why. Because if we do the margin top, how much space is supposed to be down here between this element and the bottom of the container? According to the brief, there is supposed to be precisely 80 pixels. 60, sorry, 60 pixels. What do we have? We have 60 pixels plus 16. So we have like 25% more space here than there should be. And it may seem like a very small thing, and it is a pretty small thing, but these are things that matter in this field. So you need to remove that 0 pixels from the bottom so that now we have the correct value. Similarly, see how these text elements hit the top of the container they're in, but that's not what's happening here. Well, that's margins. So for these column heading elements, we're going to need to do something similar. In this case, we need to remove the top margins, but the bottom margins, if you check the brief, are supposed to be 20 pixels. There should be some space in between these elements. We could do that via margin left here. You could do margin right on the other element. Either of those would work. Gap is not going to work too well here because gap applies evenly between all children. Getting closer. Now, the brief shows 16 pixels between these elements, and same between here. So what you might be inclined to do is set margin bottom to 16. And you know that, well, these are LIs, and LIs don't have default margins, so we don't have to worry about resetting the top margin, and you're correct about that. But there is an ever so slight issue it's the same thing that we saw here. We needed to remove the bottom margin from this element so that there was the correct distance here. Well, if we want there to be 108 pixels between this and the bottom of this text, then we can't have this bottom margin that's making it larger. So we have like, it's a smaller difference this time, but it's about 15% extra space between these two elements that we don't want. Now, how do we do that? How do we remove just the margins from the bottom of the last of these elements? There are a number of ways that you could do it. One way would be to not use margin at all. So what we could do is display flex, flex direction column, and then remove the margin bottom and use gap instead. 16 pixels. Now, if we take a look, that's the correct amount of space, but we still have the 16 pixels in between them. It shows up as purple gap inside a flex container. So that's actually a very good solution, probably the preferred solution. But I'm going to show you another one because it's important to know. But to do that, we'll need to go to VS Code, which means I need to input some of these values. 0, 0, 20 pixels. Margin left 80 pixels. Got the padding. Margin and reset the others. That might have been it. Yeah. All right. So let's give these list items the margin bottom 16 pixels. So now we're back to where we were with click with there being a bit too much space between copyright and bottom of those lists. How can we resolve that? Let's say for whatever reason we can't turn the container into a flex box. The other way that we can do this is with pseudo elements, pseudo classes. They're similar concepts. One type that we can use will allow us to reset or to specifically target the last element in a group of elements. So what we could do is, the syntax is pretty simple for all these pseudo classes. You start with a selector. So since we use BEM, it's going to be a class selector. Then you put the pseudo class that you want to use. So nth. Why is it doing that? There's an nth of type. Nth of type isn't what we want to use anyway. So last. Oh, I'm doing 2 colons. It should only be 1. So there's a bunch of different different pseudo classes that we could use. In this case, what we want to do is last of type, or last child would also work the same in this case, and set the margin to 0. So this is going to, in every group of elements with this class, it's going to set the last one's margin to 0. And we can just come see here. Now, some of you may have tried to do, you might know that you can do something like set the second element, specifically target the second element with nth of type. But that's not very good here because, say, some new social media platform, we're now using a different social media platform. We want to add, why does it keep pasting into there? We want to add a Snapchat, let's say. So we want to add Snapchat. If we did nth of type, well, the problem would be that we would be resetting the margin on the second element, but we want to always reset the margin on the last element, which is exactly what is happening here. As you can see, the last element's margin is getting set to 0. All right, so we're pretty close. Now, there are still some details that need to be handled, but they're small. But I will point out that there's a little less, there should be a little bit of space between the text and the logos. Also, the logos should be aligned with the text. You can probably use Flexbox for that. And also pay attention to the size of these logos. I mean the headings. Aside from that, it seems like just about everything is correct. Make sure to update the text to what it is supposed to be. And that's it for this video.